Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 77 of Behind the Camera, the podcast where we shine a light on the storytellers, the creatives, and the voices behind the camera. This week, I'm joined by Robert Gaines. Robert is an entrepreneur and author of Scintilla, the ultimate guide to generating business, product, and service ideas. He is a U.S Army veteran and a graduate of the University of Louisville School of Business. Robert also hosts the free Time Mastermind podcast, interviewing fellow professionals and providing commentary on current topics impacting entrepreneurs. If you're enjoying the podcast and want to stay connected, all of my links are in the About section from socials, merch, website, and much more. Hitting follow, sharing the show, or leaving a quick rating really helps Behind the Camera grow. Now, here's the interview. Robert, welcome to Behind the Camera podcast. Absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. How are we doing?
Great. I really appreciate the invite, Andy, and I'm excited to get into it.
Pleasure to have you on. So you are a business strategist, author, and the host of the Free Time Mastermind podcast. So let's just get straight into it. So what can you tell us just a little bit about your background in terms of these things? Like, so from being like a business strategist on terms of the entrepreneurialism.
Sure. My path was a little bit strange. My father was an entrepreneur. He ran an auto body shop and fixing cars, mostly insurance work. So the reason why I bring that up is a lot of people, they're realizing now that what your father did for a living affects a lot of what you do, what you're going to end up doing for a living. And so the fact that my father never punched a clock and I got to see him kind of hustle, it put that in me from a very, very young age. And although as soon as I turned 19, I ran off to the military. So I was in that system for about 8 years, got out and I did what a lot of people do. I went to college at that point and then kept trying to integrate into society as a salaried person. And it was hit and miss. And then I would start businesses. So towards the end of my military career, I had a recording studio. So I was doing demos for musicians, and that was a blast. And then later, right around the housing crisis in 2008, I had a art gallery, which for an Army guy was very strange, but I saw an opportunity and I didn't know anything about art. I actually had a guy from a big museum come into one of my shows. He's like, "Robert, you got to, put the paintings up a little higher." I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew marketing. I knew how to get people in there because I had independently studied that. And, the degree helped refine that a little bit. But I think, honestly, if people want to be entrepreneurs, I'm not telling people not to go to college, but when I think back on that time at the university, I almost would have rather spent that time working on business. But what I did after the housing crisis, because the economy here was terrible, and from 2006 to 2008, and it was tough to do anything, especially an art gallery where you're selling a lot of art. So I pivoted. I went into the insurance industry, which is a boring industry, right? But I loved it. I got really into it, started reading all the laws. I mean, I just took a deep dive. And so I kept getting these specialist positions and ended up investigating fraud. So to make a very long story short, I froze my brain out of entrepreneurship for about 10 or 12 years and just stayed in the system, made a decent salary, kept reading, kept up on what was going on. And then in some conversations that got started in late 2023 got me thinking, I need to put my toe back into the pool. And I started a mastermind group trying to get back talking to other entrepreneurs, getting that blood circulating around my heart again and find out what people are doing. I launched a podcast to support the mastermind group. And then I started a book to support all that. So none of that was planned in advance. These were just little incremental changes. And now I'm working on the follow-up to that first book. So my entrepreneurial brain is fully turned back on, and I've been pretty engaged in the community since 2023.
Yeah, that's incredible. So like, say coming out of the military then, and sort of like you say, sort of, reintegrating back into society, like, did you have that kind of entrepreneurial mindset even back then when you were in college? Like, so especially as well, because you said, you'd have rather done things a little bit differently during that time. Well, do you find that you kind of got the necessary skills from going to college but like you kind of knew where you were going from there?
And I'm not trying to be funny. there's probably only 5 or 6 concepts that I learned in college that helped me. So, and it was usually only at the 300 and 400 level classes. In other words, year 3 and year 4 is where I started to hear some things. I went, oh, okay. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about that. Like, more technical stuff like return on investment was a big one. But the thing that I remember sitting in the class and feeling like I got hit in the head with a skillet when they explained to me what commitment to escalation meant, which is related to sunk cost. And it's basically, you don't stay in something just because you've dumped a lot of money into something.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, had I been guilty of that. So one thing that we're taught, Andy, is just go, 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 keep going no matter what. No, Andy, there's data, there's signs, there's certain metrics where it's okay to quit. Put your sword down and walk off the battlefield. And I had not even thought of that as a concept. So what I would say the university did for me is I became very data driven in my analysis, because before that, I'm just going off gut instinct, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. But now if I decide to start something or to quit something, I'm looking at numbers now. Just like we were talking about being a podcaster, what's working? Are the shorts getting enough views? Why are people clicking off? So much more data driven. That helped me. But was it worth the 4 years? Would I have learned that on my own? Probably. But you're right. Yeah, it was, but I stayed entrepreneurial the whole time. So even in high school, I was selling candy. I would bring, I hate to say it, but I was copying movies back when there were VHS tapes. And in the Army, I was pulling other people's duties and I was selling things. And yeah, so I was always hustling and doing something on the side,
But sometimes you just have to, because you're kind of like, by doing that, if you put ethics to the side of it, you're kind of getting ahead in terms of that kind of mindset and that experience in terms of doing something for yourself and earning as a result of it. And I kind of feel like that's something that is almost like slapped. It's like we either have that mindset or you don't at like a particular age. And I find it quite fascinating when you talked about being data driven as well, because I notice a pattern with entrepreneurs is that, like, if one of their ventures doesn't work out, you will always see them pop up with something else in no time at all. And you would kind of think from the outside looking in, it's like, well, surely you'd need some recovery time, recoup finances. But I guess this is where like the data comes in. People have projections, and it's okay to just not ride something out till the end and close your doors when you are literally out of money. If you know you're going to be out of money at a certain point in the short to midterm future, get out of Dodge.
That's right. I think too, I would add an addendum to that, Andy, that in all of those years in the military, in my first 3 years of the military, I had a blast. I had a lot of fun. The last 5 years, it wasn't so fun. And I won't go into too much detail about that. But part of what that comes from is if you're resisting what you're meant to do, and I'm not talking about destiny, because I'm not sure if I believe in that, but people are geared towards certain things. Like certain people are just born to be actors. They're born to be on stage. They're born to paint. I mean, you just have this inside of yourself, and you're just not, so even if you're not I'm not saying you have to be a great singer, but some people just want to be on stage, and they spend their whole lives in the shadows, never stepping out there. And if you resist what you're supposed to be doing, you're going to have a really rough life, and things are going to be tough. And that's why the last 5 years of my military career, because I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I was afraid to take a risk. So honestly, the last 5 years I stayed in, I was hiding because I wasn't ready to make that leap. And then when I finally got out and was taking the risk, I thought, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So even if it's not necessarily successful at first, when you're doing something you're supposed to be doing. I know people that can go to the gym and they're never going to get any bigger for whatever reason. And then other people get in and you can tell they're in their element when they're in the gym. They can make things happen. They can reform their body, and that's what they should be doing. So definitely lean into what you should be doing. And you'll know, because your life will suck if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
So like in terms of taking the risk to go and do what you're meant to be doing, what is it that you think that stops people from taking these risks when people know that they're meant to be doing something outside of what they're doing, like the regular 9 to 5? But what stops people from making that leap?
Well, the biggest criticism I get, Andy, is a lot of people say to me, they'll say, Robert, you don't have kids, you're not married, You don't understand what I'm going through. And I get it, but there's negatives to not being married and there's negatives to not having kids. And it's a choice, just like going down the aisle and having kids is a choice. Um, so I think that's a little bit of a cop out where somebody says, how am I going to do this? Well, you made that choice to go down that path. And I made the choice to go down, like I broke my arm recently and I've talked about it on social media. I can barely move my left arm and I live alone. And it's been, this is the most where I feel vulnerable and single. Normally I'm fine by myself, but Andy, it's been rough. And I'm not going to lie to you. So, being married and having kids and having that support system in the house and people you having to support can be good and bad, but also being alone can be tough too. So I think people use whatever their circumstance is as a cop out. Well, I'm already working 1.5 jobs and things like that. If you don't do something, look, 2025 is almost over. If you don't do something, then you're going to be sitting there in the same position this time next year, wishing you would have done something. But the big thing is, Andy, you don't have to go write a book, which is I can tell you from personal experience, that's a huge endeavor. You want to be a YouTuber? You can do that with a smartphone.
Yeah.
So my answer to your question is just do something small. You don't have to go run a marathon, brother. You can just run down the block first, but you got to do something. You got to get your shoes on and get up, get out of the chair and do something. So that's my message if I have one.
Yeah, and that is a very good message because, like, only reason I ask is because so where I live in Northern Ireland, there's been almost like a bit of a boom in terms of entrepreneurs, and a lot of it is like food trucks and pop-up locations where there's like temporary locations in outdoor markets and things like that. And it is a case, and this is particularly post-COVID as well, when everywhere was starting to shut down, and then there became this somewhat of a resurgence of like old businesses did not survive, but new businesses started to thrive, which I thought was always quite interesting. And it was the sort of thing I kind of thought was like, well, after COVID, everyone's afraid to kind of go outside. Everyone's afraid to kind of invest their time and their money into these sorts of things because the way people say it's like they don't have either time or money to do anything. But people were just saying, yeah, let's do it. Let's open up this food truck. Let's open up this mobile coffee shop, and it just has thrived. So it's like, it is very interesting that, because it goes to show that if you have that mindset, there is nothing that will stop you from doing it.
And I'll say, Andy, that, and not to pimp my book, but there's a part in the book where I actually learned this from, I can't take credit for the concept because the first time I read it was actually in Jeff Walker's book called Launch. And he didn't invent the concept either, but it's what we call an MVP, or minimally viable product. But I do talk a lot about it in my book, because people want to perfect their idea. Like, let's say, open a restaurant, which again, that's a huge undertaking, big endeavor, a lot of money. And let's face it, post-COVID, who wants to open a retail location? I mean, just the insane, the regulations. So it's nuts. But you ask yourself, what's the minimally viable version of that? It's probably even below a food truck. You could probably just take a sec, because I'll tell you, I've spent a lot of time in Nicaragua now, and not much government regulation. So abuelita, or grandma, she'll sell food right off the front steps of her house. She's got a little table out there. So that's a minimally viable. So I say, yeah, go for it. Just start on what's the smallest, most affordable version of what your idea is, and start that way. And that's a lot better. I know people that didn't do that, and no joke, spent $400,000 on a retail location, and then it flopped because nobody wanted that type of food, or that, and they never worked up to find out if there was a demand for that type of food in that area. Almost $500,000, brother. That's
insane. It's a huge investment for all the risk that kind of goes into it. Because I think a particular example I can give you, like locally to me, was somebody I used to work with. We worked in investment banking together, and he was always like, maybe less business minded at the time, but I think he kind of grew into that. But massive foodie, loved his food, loved cooking and everything. And he ended up opening a pop-up burger truck. And what he did before was, they would have rented out a unused kitchen. So like these kitchens in these like bars would have only been maybe used on the weekends. So they would have hired them out for the day, and they would have had a really good social media presence. Like a lot of stunt food is the way he put it to me. They would have posted pictures of stunt food, is what he called it, where they would have made these insane creations. Now they were never going to eat them or sell them, but it just was like a bit of a sort of sneak preview in terms of what it was that they could offer. And the finished product, it could have looked somewhat similar, but it was still pretty damn good. And they kind of got the social media presence first, and then they started hiring out these kitchens, and they would have had like a sort of midday till 8 p.m. slots. You had to book your slot, and that's what got you a bit of a taster. And then they did this, I want to say it was quarterly for about 2 or 3 years. And then they were able to just, they realized that the demand was there. They realized that they were able to sort of find a location. It was popular. And now they pretty much sell out every single day in 2 different pop-up locations. And like, it's interesting because that's, it's exactly what you said. They're using that MVP strategy from they still work their day jobs when they originally started that. They worked their day jobs, and they would have had to like take time off to go and like host these pop-up days, and 8 hours, but God, they must have been making some decent coin out of it, like just from these little things. And I think that's kind of where they kind of grew. So it was like one of those things. It was like a slow burner for sure, because it took them maybe 4 years before they actually were able to sort of open somewhere and have like be able to rent a location. And they're thriving since.
You could even take a smaller version of that, Andy, and not have to serve any food. And one of my suggestions in the book, just to show examples, is I talk about walking and tasting tours. Now, if you're in Tokyo or you're in New York City or London, there's already plenty of those. But there's a lot of expanding towns that become known for their food that don't have a walking and tasting tour. So you could just be a tourist guide, but what you're doing, and this is also the other point of the book, is you're gathering intelligence. You're with the, I think you guys call them punters, right? The customers. You get to watch the behavior. You're taking them into all of these different places on this tasting tour. So you're gathering intelligence for your future restaurant or your future business or your future pop-up. So because a pop-up business that's still a lot of logistics, but a walk-in and tasting tour, you need a marketing campaign, maybe some business cards and some advertising and a good pair of shoes. So you with almost nothing, and then eventually work your way into maybe a Michelin star restaurant or not. Maybe it could be the next Marco Pierre White. People over here don't know him as well, but I'd love to meet him.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So tell us about the book then. So Cintella. So you have the second edition is coming out soon, I believe.
That's right. Well, the paperback, Kindle, and hardback, they're done. They're out. They're available on Amazon. I'm narrating the audiobook now. So the audiobook that's available now is the first edition. So I actually will tell people, if you're into audio, give me a month. I'll have the audio version out. And a lot of people don't come out with a second edition to a book, but I grew so much as a writer that I actually took out a lot. People said, "Did you add a lot?" I did, but I took out a lot of things too. I wanted to make it stronger. There's more examples. It's even more of a how-to than it was before. So who the book is for is if you're working a cubicle, you're in some dead-end job, maybe like I was in the military, and you're thinking, when I finally break out of here, I want to do something, but I have no idea where to start or what to do. So you're not a foodie. You're not, again, you don't know. The book answers that question. By the time you get through that, you're gonna have probably a list of ideas, and I talk about entire business concepts in there, or products, or just services, because some businesses are built just around delivering one type of service. Or you can have a host. The book's even for people that has a business. You could already have a restaurant and think, okay, we've got our diner in our diners that come in, and we've got our carry out. What other ways can we make money? Even like I'll give you just a quick example, like a landlord. You think, okay, you buy the building and you charge people rent. Oh, no, you can charge them for a whole lot of other things. You can put Starlink on the roof. You can be the one that charges them for internet. You can charge them for, we went down a rabbit hole with a group of landlords on that. And I think we found 13 different streams of revenue
Mm.
that other ways that the tenants would be willing to pay for and
Yeah.
that you could make profit from. So it's not just about coming up with something from scratch, which is 80% of the book, but the other 20% is, what about adding to what you're doing? And I even go into a lot of different ways of how to sell something. You could sell it as a membership or as a one-time fee. And I'm not doing it justice because there's dozens of different ways in there. So the book's whole goal is to make you think in a very unconventional way. It's the way I like to describe it, it's everything I wish they'd taught me at the university that I had to learn the hard way on my own. So $14.99, save yourself a college education. Get that book. And I recommend a lot of other books inside my book as well, the ones that kind of helped formed my knowledge of business. But like I mentioned earlier, Jeff Walker's Launch. So if you do decide to launch a business or a product or a book, his book is, I think, the perfect one for your day one when you launch it onto the world, how to do the pre-launch press and things like that. It's a genius, absolutely genius book.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned about the revenue streams for a landlord, like the potential revenue streams, because I've actually lived in a house before that operated quite similarly to that, where I was paying rent every single month, but included in that rent. Now, the rent was a little bit higher than normal rent at the time. Now, this is going back to 2015, 2016. So it was probably half the price of what it is now. But every single thing was included. Like, so we had like an electricity balance, we had a gas balance, our internet was covered in that. And like we still paid the letting agent, who then obviously they paid the landlord and took their cut. But like, he was probably still making so much more because he was probably just like paying his internet as normal, and then anything that went over the budget per month, like I think he sort of like kept like an allowance of £60 a month for electric and £60 for gas, I think. And but anything over that, that was like, okay, well, you guys have to cover that because that's outside of what you're paying me. It's interesting that that's something that isn't really tapped into as much, because it's quite simplistic, really, you know?
That's right. Well, we get thinking about, I think the biggest mistake, and I try to dispel it in the book, is the easiest thing we think of is, I'm going to be a competitor. You know, I'm going to start a podcast. Now I'm competing against all these other podcasts, or I'm going to start a restaurant. And of course, you're competing down the street. I spend a lot of time in the book talking about complementary and companion products. So complementary is probably where the most money is. So instead of trying to build a restaurant, you think, what product can I get myself into at a restaurant at the cash register? Then you don't have the overhead. You know, you don't have the insurance, the tips, the government to worry about. What can I create that I can put on that, on their next to their cash register that I can sell? Like, I'll give you it's going to be silly, but maybe might resonate with somebody in the audience. If you're in a historic town, and of course, England's full of, you guys have gas stations that are older than our entire country in the United States. So, but you could do a photo book. In other words, get a nice camera, get a halfway decent camera, go around, study the art. There's plenty of stuff on YouTube how to do it. Take a bunch of photos and then contact me, because I'll help you for free, because that's what I do. I help authors, and I'll explain to you how to put your book together, format it, and get it on KDP. Print it, have a few sent to your place, and then make arrangements with the business owners at those locations that you take photos with, and put 5 copies at the counter. And put, a reasonable amount of money on there. You can do it like, what do you call it? I forget what it is when you leave the product there, but you don't charge the vendor for it. Can't think of the word, but you could do it that way. Or they could buy, say, look, I want to feature your location prominently in the book.
Yeah.
I'm going to need X amount of money up front and things like that. So there's a lot of different ways. And again, obviously these are small side hustles, not entire business concepts, but not everybody's looking for something that's going to consume 60 hours of their week.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's an absolutely fantastic concept. And that's something actually, I do see it quite widely done around here because, like, being here, such a small country, and particularly whereabouts I am, it's such like a small, tight knit community. So you'll have like local artists and local anything really. Local art is actually one that you would see quite prominently in different places. Um, then there's so local art, breweries as well is another big one as well. Like where these people are simply just acting as a vendor. Like they don't. So I mean, obviously, being an entrepreneur doesn't necessarily mean you have to run your own business from top to bottom, but you can just invest in a product. It can just be like a product that you can kind of get out there. Like writing a book, for example. You write a book doesn't necessarily mean you own a business. You're just doing something that's out in the world, and it's when you break it down like that, it's simple networking, really, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. Well, that's why the follow-up, that's funny you mentioned that. Perfect tie-in. The book that I'm working on right now, the follow-up to Cintella, is a book basically on LinkedIn. I'm using LinkedIn as a vehicle to explain networking because I don't want to just write a book on networking. So a lot of it is kind of how to get more attention on LinkedIn, but it's really, what the book is really about is about relationships and connecting with people. And before we started on the show, you and I talked a lot about reciprocity and people helping each other. And I have this treasured group of small friends that whatever I put on Facebook or LinkedIn, they're going to support. I do the same for them when they go live. I make sure I'm there, or at least I make sure YouTube is got their content going. If I have to be, if I'm cleaning the house, their stuff is on. So I have a handful of people that support me no matter what, and I do that for them. So if you've got, they talk about you only need 1,000 fans. Well, I prefer to have friends, and if you've got about 3 dozen really good entrepreneur friends that support you no matter what, and you support them, your reach would be, and I don't have 3 dozen yet. I'm going to admit that. I'm looking for those people that get it, that understand I'm willing to invest the time in what they're doing and co-promote. And as we said before, those people are very rare, but I don't need 100. I figure I need about 3 dozen based on the results I've gotten so far. And then let me just drop into back to Scintilla for a second. You don't even have to write a book, Andy. There are so many great authors in the UK where their book is no longer in print. So in Scintilla, I explain you can buy the intellectual property rights for books that have not been in print for a long time. Now, obviously, you've got to acquire the rights, and you want to something that's even more amazing. And I don't know why people are talking. I think intellectual property rights right now is the most undervalued asset that you can put your money into. Now, I'm not a financial advisor, but I'll tell you how crazy it can be. I've offered people, and I'm still got a lot of deals in the pipeline, and I don't have anybody that's signed on the dotted line yet. But I did approach one author that if I said their name, you'd probably know them, and I offered them $1,500 for the rights to produce the Spanish version of their book. Now, we've got 22 million, I think it's 22 million Spanish speakers in the Western Hemisphere. Huge market. He's not planning to produce that book in Spanish, and it's a good selling book in the English world. So offered him $1,500 for the Spanish rights, and he's thinking about it. I don't know if I'm going to get it or not, but think about it. That's a minor investment, and you're buying a best-selling book. So, and then you just have to, what do you got to do? You got to pay to translate it. You got to try to get that author to help you co-promote it a little bit and run some Amazon ads. Boom, you're in business.
Oh, like that is, I can't believe how slept on something like that is, but I guess it probably just comes down to the fact that a lot of people just don't realize that you can do these things, because I kind of think, for most people, myself included, like you hear a book's out of print, then, okay, there's only finite copies left. Because on the surface, that's what it looks like. But then the idea is still there. The inception is still there. It can just be reproduced. But what way does that work then? So you buy the intellectual property rights, does it just kind of come out all the same, but you would just have your name on it in terms of like a credit?
You would be the publisher. So So if you speak, let's just go with the Spanish example for a second. Let's do George Orwell's 1984, which is available in Spanish, by the way. But let's say it wasn't. And George Orwell's been gone for a long time, so you would have to go to whoever the publishing company was that owns the rights to his work. So you go to them and you say, "Look, I want exclusive." How I would pitch it, and what I think you could get into for the least amount of money is you could pitch it and say, "Look, I want exclusive rights to do the print and audiobook versions of the Spanish version of 1984. I only want that exclusivity for 5 years." Now, why am I doing that, Andy? I'm doing it because it's going to be cheaper. I'm not buying the rights forever. And so for 5 years, I'm licensing it. Now, if you've got deep pockets, yeah, go for it. Buy the whole thing, buy it for eternity. But I only need it for 5 years. If it sells like hotcakes, I can always go back and add on another 5 years or buy it in perpetuity. And something else that I mentioned in the book, that even if you don't have the money, you could find a group online that loves, because I love George Orwell as a writer, but there are plenty of groups and clubs where you could get together or do like a Kickstarter crowdfunder where you and 7 other close friends or people on the internet come together, pool your money to buy the rights. And then you're also going to share the commissions, because Amazon's KDP pays you 60% of your cover price. So my book, cheap, $14.99, very cheap. I get 60% of that for every book that I sell. So same for you and your fellow investors. So you could probably afford a book on your own in a foreign language, probably. But if you get enough people together, you could buy the English rights to it on a book that already had a very established sales track record. The books that I would say, just to go one step further to help people really understand what I'm talking about, there's a lot of information that changes over time. But books that are based on principles never change. I don't care if it was written in look at 1984. That was written in 1948. That's one of the greatest books ever written in any language. It's fantastic. And people 100, 200, 500 years from now are going to be talking about that book. There are other books out there that are forgotten to time. And your job is to unearth those and find them, because principles don't change. Look at Shakespeare.
Yeah,
because what's Shakespeare always talking about? Greed, jealousy, and the 7 deadly sins. So sorry, I get excited when I talk about this. Andy, you got me wound up.
That's what we're here for, man. That's what we're here for. Yeah, like that's it's so true. Like, I mean, and people talk about these like hidden gems, across all walks of life, and like, you could literally just stumble across like the IP ready for anything that people might not have even heard of, and it could just be the next greatest thing. Like, there's just something that was completely forgotten. Well, it sounds like a solid business idea, like, forgotten books, books forgotten in time, like you say, like that's incredible. Oh my God.
I dedicate a lot of time in the book to IP, because again, I think it's actually, I've had 2 people tell me you need to quit talking about it. They said, once people catch on to this. So if you think about it, in 2000, the big thing was registering URLs, the www dot, people bought Coke.com because the Coca-Cola company didn't understand the technology. And I think there's still some aspects of that. Now, if you're dealing with the real trifecta, would be if the author was still alive and you could meet them face to face. So if you stay local and just say, "Look, I'm going to pay you for this," even if you're paying the publishing company, you may want to give the author a little bit of money on the side to help co-promote it. So here's this author nobody's seen in 10 or 15 years, and you get him on your YouTube channel, and so you kind of build him back up in the public. So yeah, we could, like I said, connect with me on social media. If you get a situation like that, we can talk about all the different ways that it can go down. But I see your wheels turning, Andy. So I know you're thinking.
100%. It's one of those things where it's like, people don't necessarily think of it, but it's right there in front of you. Because I think, like I mentioned before, people kind of see things surface level for what it is, and they don't really understand what can be done with that. And like, I'm 100% guilty of that. Like, I'm not the most entrepreneurial person ever. Like, I mean, like anybody, I have ideas, I've had ideas, but just never, not acted on them, not for fear or anything like that, but I would just say more for not knowing how to and dedicating the time to it. And I kind of think that is a sort of like an obstacle for a lot of people in terms of wanting to get into business for themselves or wanting to release a product, which, I do think is an important distinction, because, I think that kind of takes away a lot of the risk element of it, because if you want to launch a product that you want to sell to people, that's like completely independent rather than like opening up a store somewhere, for example.
Well, plus two, I think that people should get in a mastermind group, because I was on a podcast the other day, and the host kind of flippantly said, ideas are a dime a dozen. Well, maybe, but they did make a good point subsequent to that. They said the real problem is execution.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, but I think it's a two-part problem. One, we need better ideas, which again, the book speaks to that. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Good ideas aren't a dime a dozen. And knowing what a good idea is when you see one. So let's look at how people know if a scientific work is worthy of a Nobel Prize. Well, the definition is often when other top scientists read it, they say, oh, that's a Nobel Prize. Or you see a scene, you're at the theater and you're just taken away. I remember when Matthew McConaughey was in the Dallas Buyers Club.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not want to see that movie. It wasn't a subject matter I was interested in. It was a depressing film, but I had to go because there was my date wanted to see a movie and there was nothing else. Everything else was way worse. About 10 minutes into the movie, I'm texting a friend of mine that's into movies, and I said, this guy's going to win the Oscar. So you just know, you get this sense that, it was a very transformative, it was amazing. And I think actually his co-star ended up getting the Oscar instead of him, but it was a great movie. So there are things that kind of make your senses go off. I'll give you an example just from today. I'm messing around with my AC. I have, sometimes I'll open I don't know what you call it, a register. Sometimes I'll open the vents in certain rooms and I'll close it in other rooms. Now, I'm not I don't know if you can tell on camera, I'm not an extremely tall guy. So, I've always got a stick in my hand, and I have like a back scratcher here that I use for different things when I have to reach. And I thought, I know this sounds crazy, but I thought, I wonder if there's any market for a device that's extendable, that you can change the registers, the vents on your ceiling. Now, I haven't looked it up. I just thought of that right before we went into the podcast. And I started thinking about the different little handles that each one of them has. So the end of it has to be able to manipulate. So all that's right before I got on here, all that's running through my mind.
Yeah.
So the book's not just about intellectual properties. There's physical things. Anytime you run into something and you think, does this exist? Is there something for this? Go check. Check to see if it's trademarked, to see if it's registered, to see if the IP is already in there. So yeah, people have made millions off of silly little inventions,
Oh, for sure. For sure. I quite like that example you've just given as well, because like immediately the first thing that comes to my mind is like a Swiss Army knife of like little different attachments on the end of it, just suited for different like different handles for different like sort of door type things, just again, that's like the kind of that's as far as my ideas kind of go, is like developing on things that I might have heard, but again, it's all situational as well. Like you're in this situation, you're just kind of think, yeah, like, does this exist? And I kind of think everybody's had that moment, but it's always just kind of ended there. It's like, I wonder, it would be handy if we had this, if this existed. But that's the thing. I mean, you never know until you check.
Sure. And I think there's a value to, and that's why the podcast is called the Free Time Mastermind podcast, because it was initially started as a mastermind group before it ever went to YouTube. The reason why I bring that up, Andy, is a mastermind group, even if it only meets monthly, they'll follow up. They'll say, Andy, did you look up to see if they have that back scratcher / vent opener? Have you? Because that's the one. I think there's a lot of advantages to a mastermind group, but for most of us, as far as execution. So again, what the guy said is there's a lot of ideas, but what about the execution? Mastermind group solves that problem. because if you're with a good group of guys, they're good. They're going to stay on you. They're going to
For
stay on top.
sure. For
And that
sure.
was a good thing in the Army. If a guy was slacking or he wasn't jogging or running or pulling his weight, we would stay on each other and motivate each other. So yeah, I would say by association, because no offense to the people that I grew up with, but had I just stayed and associated with that crowd that I grew up with in high school, I wouldn't have done any of the things that I did. Nothing against them, but they
Of
want
course.
different things. I've never looked at somebody's life and said, that's what I want. I've always wanted something completely different. So I knew I had to be around different people and put myself on the line and fly to strange places like Nicaragua. When I went down there, I didn't know a single person that had ever gone there before.
Oh,
And they
wow.
said, why are you going? And I said, because nobody I know has ever been there. That was the whole reason for going. And it opened up this whole, I'm moving down there. I've
Oh,
said
really?
it in a podcast. Yeah, my house is for sale here in Florida right
Oh,
now.
wow.
I'm done. I'm gone. It's that good. I'm like, what? This is amazing down here. Yeah, it's great.
Well, that's the thing. It just kind of shows like doing these different things. It like can be an eye opening experience. It can be life changing, and to touch on this sort of the mastermind group that you mentioned, it's it's not that it's like it's not just that it sort of adds help to the execution, because if you don't know something, someone else either will know it or might know somebody who can help, and this like chain reaction, which only kind of helps build your network more than you would have by just sort of pondering on it yourself. But also it adds accountability as well, because I think that's something that, I mean, by no means am I an entrepreneur, but I know that you need accountability, because there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of investment and time that goes into these things that you need to be accountable for, because well, it's a failsafe really, isn't it? Like if you aren't sort of completely, dotting your I's, crossing your T's, something could go wrong that could be completely avoidable.
And the tough thing about being an entrepreneur is you have to be a self-starter. I did something this morning I almost never do. I woke up late. Nobody's going to say anything. Nobody knows. The world, nobody knew until I told you just now. I woke up at 9:30 this morning. I was ashamed of myself because I'm an early morning, guy and motivated, but I stayed up way too late last night. And what I was doing last night wasn't very productive. So the thing is, if you're an entrepreneur, I mean, obviously, when the times when I get called in and I have to punch a clock, I'm always there and I do my job. But when you're spending time on your business, let's say you only have Saturdays or Sundays to dedicate to your business, you got to show up for it. So like when I'm writing on this, to finish this LinkedIn book, I write for 2 hours in the morning. Now, obviously I didn't make it this morning, but normally I have 2 hours. I have it scheduled in my phone to be sitting at this desk from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. every day, 7 days a week until this book gets done. And I'll tell you, this book is being written 4 times faster than Cintella was, because I was a first-time author. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have the tools. And I think one thing that's different about me, Andy, is when I run into a problem, I build a system around it. So if something fails or if something works, I create checklists and, okay, that didn't work. How am I going to do this right? So the process keeps getting evolved. And, writing is still difficult, but it's moving so much faster this time because of the skills that I learned the first time. And
Yeah.
if anybody has a desire to write a book, I would encourage them to do so, because something I try to say in every podcast, writing is one of the only skills that if you spend time on it, it'll change every aspect of your life. You got to text and email your mom. You're going to send a resume to an employer that you write. Your proposals, if you go to get a loan from the bank, you have to give them a bit. So all of that's writing, written
Mhm.
communication. So I tell people, write a book just to make yourself a better writer, because even when I asked to come on your show, we started off in written communication.
Yeah.
Apparently, whatever I put down, on that digital paper, you said, you know what, I'm going to give a chance. I'm going to give this guy a chance.
And I'd even go one step further as well to say that even with podcasting, if the more you do it, I think you become a better speaker generally. Like, now humans aren't perfect. We all trip over our words. There's a lot of ahs, and all this, but I think, I mean, for me personally, anyway, I think I've become a much better speaker in the 18 months that I've done this compared to what I was like beforehand. And I kind of feel like it was one of those things. It was quite transformative because when I started out, I kind of like knew what I needed to do, but not really sort of how to do it. So I just did it anyway. And then you kind of have that. So you have that's your baseline right there. And I think this is probably the same in writing. You have like a baseline, with your ideas going down and how you kind of execute it, and you just develop on it constantly, and then you find your voice, and everything just starts to improve. Everything starts to fall into place, and then everything just kind of comes out naturally in the end. Like I mean, I don't know about yourself, like with your podcast, like, but do you find the same thing?
Absolutely. If you go back and look at those early interviews, and I went back after, I would say after the 10th interview. So I was doing an interview. I committed. I did an interview every week for an entire year for 52 weeks. I like clockwork. I published, but I would say 10 interviews in, that's when I went and grabbed a bunch of books on how to interview, how to ask questions. So I was going, books from reporters and things like that. And to the certain degree where I think I started to kind of spook the guests a little bit, because these people weren't doing regular media. So I was getting a little, maybe doing a little bit too much research, because ultimately you have to make it entertaining, but for a moment there, I thought I was Charlie Rose, or, I can't think of a good, who are some of the big, name some of the big interviewers in Britain. There's even some of the classic guys from the 70s over there that you guys have that I'll go watch.
Oh
Like
yeah, like one of the bigger ones back in the day would have been Michael Parkinson, and then like now you've got like Graham Norton, Jonathan Ross would be like the big ones at the moment.
Yeah, Graham Norton, I remember him, Ross, and then there's a guy even, but well, I'm sure we could spend a lot of time trying to figure that out, but there's another guy that's huge. And like I said, I'll go back and watch the ones from the 1970s and the 1980s, because I like British stage actors that came to Hollywood. And there was this big wave of those guys in the 70s and 80s. So I'll go back and like Orson Welles, he would come to London and get interviewed. So yeah, I go back and there's brilliant interviewers. So I went back and did that too. I looked at that interview style, and yeah, it's definitely an evolution. And I tried to do as well as I can. The big thing that was harder for me to understand is what people are looking for on YouTube is different than how I consume information.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how it is, Andy, we only see the world through our own eyes. So I don't know what's going on inside your head or other people, So a lot of mistakes I made early on is I was doing what I like. And like we talked earlier about an artist, you might like to produce a particular type of music, but there might not be any audience for that. So I had to try to find between what do people want to listen to and what do I want to do? And like with the thumbnails, I'm working with vidIQ now to do suggestions for the titles and the thumbnails. And sometimes, Andy, I don't like what it's suggesting because I feel like it's deception. And I'm like, I don't want to fool people to come to watch my episode. I'm not so desperate for fame that I have to, do this clickbait. And yeah, so I did, but I went through that phase where I kind of had the surprised face on my thumbnail. And I thought, I'm not going to be a clown. That's not going to be me. Not that I'm too good to be a clown. I'm happy to do it, but not in that format, not as a business entrepreneur podcaster. No, I'll be a clown on a separate channel.
Yeah, of course. It's one of those things when you're doing something for a specific purpose, you kind of have to sort of stick in the right lane for that. So in terms of like the writing, obviously you're writing your second book at the moment, following up from Scintilla. And you talked about the writing process being so much different, a lot more linear this time. Like when you were writing Scintilla, like how did you find the writing process being a first-time author, particularly of nonfiction?
I just had to adapt processes because I'm starting from scratch and had never written anything maybe more than 6 pages before. And I did watch some YouTube videos, as we all do. And I thought, I'll just start with a list of ideas. So just single sentences first. And I would go back and say, okay, which of those can I turn into a paragraph? And then once I had them into a paragraph, I thought, okay, how can I get this into a page or multiple pages? Or is this big enough to dedicate its own chapter. And really, for me, the complicated part comes later after you have this massive number of pages to wrangle them into
Mhm.
a cohesive, because even when I'm narrating the audiobook, where we naturally kind of pause between paragraphs. But as you're reading it, you might want to flow into it. So it gets musical, Andy. You realize there's beats in there, and that's why poets, why there's so few good ones, because you're having to make these words musical. But anyway, the short answer is just start. You could start with singular words for concepts or sentences, and then so you have this creative sit down with yourself with a legal pad and just write all the single sentences you can. Then you have a second creative session where you try to expand each of those. One thing that saved me, only about 20% of that book was in my head, Andy. The rest of it was revelation and research.
Mhm.
Even if you have a PhD in whatever, I guarantee you the things you're going to put in that book are going to be also beyond your experience. And something they joke, and this gets made fun of, but I think it's a smart thing to say. Some people say, if you really want to learn something, teach it. So in a way, I had to go into challenge my own beliefs on things. And the book, thankfully, in nonfiction, it's rooted in science. So I have a lot of research studies in there because I had these ideas about things, and I had to check to make sure the science was valid behind my assumptions. And not all of it was. The stuff that wasn't, I had to throw it away. But yeah, a lot of that book came from the research. So only 20% of it did I kind of have in my brain beforehand.
Yeah. That's incredible. That's incredible. And then in terms of your upcoming book, I know you're still in the writing process, but do you have a projected sort of release for it at this point?
Yes, I would say, and breaking my arm really slowed things down, and I broke it right at the shoulder, so I can't hardly move my left arm at all. But I'm still projected for, let's say, end of March, the middle of April. And to any authors out there, and I hate to say this, and you as a podcaster, Andy, you're completely going to understand what I'm saying. Podcasters, they tell you that your thumbnail is everything. I hate that, but it's true. The thumbnail is everything. You got the thumbnail, and then your title. What do we do when we go on a dating app, Andy? We're looking at faces. We're not looking at where they went to college. Nobody cares. Women don't care. Men, we don't care. We're looking at the face. Your book cover, and here's the new. This is actually an Amazon author version, so it's got some words across the front. But I went to a professional to have that done. My point is, for you authors and hopeful authors out there, you're gonna need to spend a lot of money on your cover and get it professionally done, because people are flipping through stuff all day long, and you've got to stop the scroll. So you've got to really grab people's attention. That book is like your face on the dating app, or like the thumbnail for the podcaster. I hate that it's that way. I wish I could just write a good book and just say the content is going to find the audience. No, it doesn't work that way. Just like dating doesn't work that way. So I'm a realist. When I'm in our mastermind group and on my social media, some people say I'm brutal, but you got to understand how humans behave and apply it to business. And dating and how a business works is they're exactly the same things. Behaviors are exactly the same. You go into a restaurant and get treated bad, you're not going back. If you're in a relationship and you're treated bad, you're not going to go back. It's very simple.
Well, it's so true. I'm with you on the whole thumbnail thing, because my thumbnails are so basic. Like, I just have my logo with the name of the guest underneath it, but it's like we say, I'm kind of guilty of the contents in there you have, but like, we're in this age now where attention spans they've got to be the lowest that they've ever been, with short form content being what it is. And, I mean, impressively enough, people make a living off that, which is fantastic. It just kind of keeps the sort of entrepreneur spirit alive. It's sort of evolved and developed, but it makes it harder for a lot of other people too, because like, I think it takes like that kind of creative mindset and like very unique mindset to be able to sort of make it work, to be able to sort of work these algorithms that none of us know how they work, and have that eye-catching thing that's going to make you tune in and keep coming back.
And that's why I use vidIQ. I don't get any money for saying this, but and again, some of the the suggestions. vidIQ, for people that don't know, is an application for that helps YouTubers determine what you could even look up what type of video to shoot. So if you don't even know an idea, it can give you ideas. But it also can create the thumbnails for you. It can create the titles, even the hashtags and the descriptions. It can do it all. But the problem with it, Andy, is a lot of YouTubers are using it now. So now we're in a war. So back when I had a recording studio years ago, everybody wanted to go to the studio that had the new mics and the new guitars and the new drums. So you're in this arms race. That's the word that I was looking for. But yeah, I'm definitely seeing an uptick in the views from the stuff that I'm using from vidIQ, because I just want to interview people. I want to research and I want to have the conversation. I do not want to spend 2 hours designing a thumbnail, but that's what Mr. Beast does. And that's these other big guys. They have a whole team, and they'll have a 4-hour meeting over what that thumbnail needs to look like. Andy, that would suck the soul from my body if I had to sit into a meeting for more than 10 minutes about what the thumbnail had to look like. I'm not that guy. That's why when it came to the cover, I gave it to a big company that's all they do is covers. I gave them some vague ideas and I said thank you and handed them some money.
And that's literally the way it should be. I completely understand. And it's one of those things, as much of a pain as it is just part of the trade, unfortunately. But it makes a job for somebody, and that's kind of the spirit of everything that we've been talking about over the last hour.
Same thing with restaurants, right, Andy? It's presentation. Why, the restaurants that are very, very expensive, it's the same food. There's pubs in Britain that have world-class food, but it's just a regular pub, and, they put it on a basic plate or whatever. But if you take that same food and transport it into a posh area of town, put a tablecloth on the cover, have the guy, waiter dress in a suit, now you can charge 10 times as much for the same thing. And that's the thumbnail, unfortunately. We don't like it, but it's the truth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Robert, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on Behind the Camera. Thank you so much for your time. Been incredibly insightful. Just been a wonderful chat. I would just like to give you the floor if you're able to tell us where the listeners can find you.
Sure. Thank you, Andy. And of course, I'm a fellow podcaster. So the Time Mastermind podcast, I do interviews with entrepreneurs. And we have a website, freetimemastermind.com, primarily really where I'd like to meet people. If they want to buy the book on Amazon, Cintella, The Ultimate Guide, you'll find that. But also LinkedIn. I'm in this phase where I really want to talk to people and link up with people on LinkedIn. So you can find me under Robert Gaines on LinkedIn. If you're a fledgling author or you need help with a business idea, I'm not a consultant. I don't charge money. All I do is sell books. So I'm not trying to get your email and upsell you. I'm not one of those guys. Nothing wrong with those people, but connect with me. We can talk about getting your book on Amazon, KDP. I have a writers group on LinkedIn and Facebook, where I help fledgling authors get their work out there. And again, no charge, no upsell. So love to meet with anybody out there if they want to talk.
Amazing. Well, thank you again, Robert. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andy. My pleasure.
And there you have it. That brings us to the end of episode 77 of Behind the Camera. Massive thank you to Robert Gaines for being this week's guest. I personally found this eye-opening in terms of entrepreneurial strategies, what it means to be an entrepreneur, and also the notion of choosing to feel tied down by personal circumstance. This I found particularly interesting. Once again, if you'd like to stay connected and support the podcast, drop a follow, check out my link tree for socials and more, and share the episode with a friend who you think would get a lot out of it. Until next time, take care, stay creative, and I'll see you soon. But until then, peace.